Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another episode of The Draw Step. We've done it. We have finally done it. We have made a lot of toxic decks on this channel. We've done a lot of deck challenges, but we have finally gone back, gotten one of the OG, most toxic, salt-inducing commanders of all time, and we built a deck around him. Now, for those of you who don't know who I'm talking about, I am talking about Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. This old boy has rated so high on salt scales for so long. He doesn't get played as much anymore. I will say I have played him against my friends before, and they don't like him. They don't like him whatsoever. And it's hard to blame because of his ability. So it says, white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. So you are simultaneously doing two things at once. You are both tax evading, you're both making your stuff cheaper, while also taxing your opponent's stuff. Now, I am a true-blooded American. I cannot stand taxation. However, those just great British roots inside me love taxing other people. So here we are. That was a very odd tangent to go on, but it just felt fitting for this video. So what are we doing here? We're obviously in white blue, so Azorius. And we have some of to couple with our commander's ability, we're doing quite a bit of other taxation type pieces. There have been quite a few over time, like you could put in a Winter's Orb. You can really throw in any of the Phyrexians, like the blue one that reduces an opponent's hand down to 0 and draws you 7 cards. There's a lot of really disgusting ways you can do this deck and go with it, but this is how I have put it together. We're going to start out with the artifacts. This one's kind of random, but just a nice way to get some of your creatures that you lay out and rolling. We have Cloak of the Bat, which gives a creature flying and haste. Next, we have Rings of Brighthearth for 3 mana. Whenever you activate an ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2. If you do, copy that ability, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Nice little value piece right there. Right here, you can't see it, but I promise you it's a Wayfarer's Bauble. That's what this card is. Then we have Navigation Orb. Again, just more for our ramp piece. Campfire for 1 mana. You can tap and gain 2 life, or you can pay 2, tap it, exile Campfire, put all commanders you own from the command zone and from your graveyard into your hand and shuffle your graveyard. 2 things right there. The first and foremost, why is in this deck, is because your commander, again, once it hits the battlefield, it's making your stuff less expensive, it's making your opponent's stuff more expensive. When your opponents see that, they are going to despise it, and they are going to want to try to kill your commander as quickly as possible. So your commander is probably going to get taken out quite a bit. And this is a way, at least once, to be able to avoid that commander tax. Just send him to your hand and then get him onto the battlefield that way. The second thing is the other place where this card is incredibly strong is in my Phage the Untouchable deck. And if you haven't seen that yet, that is going to be linked up in the corner. Editor guy, make sure you put the link up in the corner and check out the Phage the Untouchable deck, because that's a toxic deck you're going to enjoy. Next, Cold Steel Heart, again for that ramp package. Azorius Locket, more ramp. Arcane Signet, you know what it does. Patrier's Seal, I really hope that's how that is pronounced. Taps for mana, but can also untap a legendary creature you control. We have a few legendary creatures that have tap abilities, so that's kind of nice right there. Soul Ring, again, my opinion, every deck should have a Soul Ring. If you disagree, though, let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear a strong argument for why every deck shouldn't have a Soul Ring. And our final ramp piece is Everflowing Chalice. You can pay 2, put a charge counter on it, and then it taps for 1 for each charge counter it has on there. So this one is where we're starting to get into some of our strategy, because on its own, basically for every 2 you put in, you're getting an additional charge counter. That's how much it's tapping for. So it can create more mana later on in the game. However, in this deck, we have quite a few instant sorceries and some repeatable ways to proliferate. And those charge counters can be proliferated. So that is a strong ability in and of itself. The Everflowing Chalice, great in a lot of decks. In this deck, it is going to become exponentially stronger as we proliferate and add additional counters on it. Speaking of counters and potential proliferation targets, Magistrate's Scepter, an artifact for 3 mana. You can pay 4, tap, put a charge counter on Magistrate's Scepter, and then tap it, remove 3 charge counters from it, take an extra turn after this one. On its face, it is, 12, 15 mana for an extra turn. Now, granted, it is a way to potentially take multiple extra turns, so that's why it is priced so expensively. But how we can run it in this deck is 3 to lay it, 4 to tap it, get a charge counter on it. You can proliferate those charge counters, be able to tap, take extra turns. So most extra turn spells are between 7 to 8 mana, depending on the one that you are going with. So that's not a bad rate for this. Again, especially from the standpoint of being able to do this multiple times and not having to pay all that extra mana. Chimeric Mass, again, it has an X, so you can put as much mana as you want into this. It enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it, and then you can pay 1 until end of turn. Chimeric Mass becomes a construct artifact. Creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of charge counters on it. Again, proliferate those charge counters, make it even stronger, make it a bigger threat to attack with. Titan Forge for 3 mana. You can pay 3, tap it, put a charge counter on it, and then tap, remove 3 charge counters from Titan Forge, put a 9/9 colorless golem artifact creature token onto the battlefield. Same deal as before. We're just proliferating, putting a bunch of those counters on there, tapping it, and getting those massive golems out. And then our final artifact is Contagion Engine. 6 mana. When Contagion Engine enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls, pay 4, proliferate, then proliferate again. So for 4 mana, you are doing so much. The proliferating on its own is a great effect. Doing it twice, you are going to be wiping out an opponent's creatures. You're getting those -1/-1 counters on an opponent's creatures. You are also doing things like your Titan Forge or your Magistrate Scepter, all those different proliferate pieces that we were talking about before, pieces that are stronger with the proliferate effect. Doing it twice for 4 mana, solid value that you're getting right there. Moving on, we have some of our instants and sorceries. Iona's Judgment for 5 mana, exile target creature or enchantment. If I'm being completely honest with you, there's so many different pieces that you really could go. Like, I would say a Swords of Plowshares. That would be a far less mana intensive option that you can do instead. So you can kind of pick and choose. Let me know in the comments below how you would kind of tweak this, or what instants or sorceries you may go with instead. Everything has its upsides and downsides. But Unexplained Disappearance for 2 mana. Return target creature to its owner's hand and surveil 1. Gives you that card selection, and you can either bounce an opponent's stuff, or if you have one of our creatures that have a really strong ETB, you can return that. Next up, Gilding Bolt for 3 mana. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater and scry 2. Kind of similar again, that card advantage, being able to see what you have coming up. Not card advantage, but card selection. And destruction. Contact other plane, 4 mana, roll a d20. It's a card draw, but also being able to see the cards that you get, depending on what you roll. You're confronted by robbers, 4 mana, choose 1, stall for time, tap up to 3 target creatures, or call for aid and create 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. I love spells that give you the flexibility like that to be able to pick and choose what's going to be the best ability for that particular moment. Adamant Will, 2 mana, target creature gets +2/+2, indestructible until end of turn. That's going to be great protection for our commander when an opponent does try to take it out. An offer you can't refuse, probably one of the best counterspells in the game outside of the OG counterspell. Or like the free one, what's it called? Where basically if you control your commander, you can cast it for free. Obviously that's the best, but as far as cards that the average human being can afford, an offer you can't refuse is up there. Fuel for the Cause, 4 mana, counter target spell, then proliferate. Solid counterpiece. And again, we've already been over why proliferate is so great. Steady Progress, 3 mana, proliferate, and then draw a card. Great value there. Tezzeret's Gambit, 3, and then a Phyrexian blue, so you can either pay a blue or 2 life, draw 2 cards, then proliferate. Again, great value right there. Modify Memory, 5 mana, exchange, wow, that was challenging. Control of 2 target creatures controlled by different players. If you control neither creature, draw 3 cards. So this can be fun in a multitude of different ways. So you can either take like a crappy 1/1 token that you have and exchange it for your opponent's Blightsteel Colossus, right? You can do something absurd like that. Or if you want to just be super silly, funny, haha, you can take an opponent's 1/1 creature and exchange it for another opponent's Blightsteel Colossus. Does it really do you any good? No, not necessarily, but great for the lulz. Amazing for the toxic effect it's going to have on the one opponent. And, you know, maybe you can do some bribery. Maybe you can be like, hey, if I get you their Blightsteel Colossus, you don't touch me with that. And on top of all of that, you're drawing what, 3 cards? 3 cards. I know how to read. That's great. Next, Sanctify, 2 mana, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and you gain 3 life. The 3 life probably doesn't matter that much, but hey, it's nice. Clock Spinning, 1 mana, buy back 3, so you can really just be paying this for 4 on a regular basis. Choose a counter on target permanent or suspend card, remove that counter from that permanent card, put another one of those. It's proliferate. You're going to use it to proliferate, 4 mana to just keep spinning that, or you can just do 1. So, up to you. Fateful Absence, 2 mana, destroy target creature or planeswalker, its controller investigates. Again, there's plenty of, destroy, exile effects in white, so you can kind of pick and choose what's best for you. Fateful Mending, white and a blue, you gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and then you can flash it back for 3 mana. So that's pretty solid effect, pretty solid value on that card right there. Dream Fracture, 3 mana, counter target spell, its controller draws a card, you draw a card. Nice counter spell there. And then Sky Whaler's Shot, 3 mana, destroy target creature with power 3 or greater, scry 1. And last but not least, we have Flood of Recollection for 2 blue. Return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, exile Flood of Recollection. We have a lot of great instants and sorceries that we just went through. If there was one particular that you liked, bring it back, do it again. Next, we actually are running 3 Planeswalkers in this deck. The first one is Elminster. El, Elminster, I guess. 3, and then Azorius. He starts with 5 loyalty counters. Whenever you scry, the next instant and sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of cards looked at while scrying this way. Again, as we went through with our instants and sorceries, we have quite a few different ways to scry. So now that's then reducing the cost even more on top of the cost reduction that our commander's doing. You can do +2, draw a card, then scry 2. So even on its own, even with its own ability, it's going to be reducing the cost of your instants and sorcery spells by 2. Great. -3. Exile the top card of your library. Create a number of 1/1 blue fairy creature tokens with flying equal to that card's mana value. Are we going to be doing that a ton? Not necessarily, but depending on the position where you find yourself, if you just need a bunch of flying creatures or protection or an army later in the game, cool, do that. Build up that army. Love that for you. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Again, 3, and then Azorius. Starts with 4 loyalty counters. +1, draw a card at the beginning of your next end step. Untap 2 lands. -3, put target non-land permanent into its owner's library, third from the top. And then -8, you get an emblem with whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent an opponent controls. If you can get to that 8, that is such a ridiculously strong effect. You have plenty of card draw in this deck. You are going to be wiping out your opponent's boards. And again, remember, that proliferate applies to Planeswalkers, so you can escalate, get to that 8 even faster. Our last Planeswalker, Dovin, Hand of Control. 2, and you can pay either white or blue. Artifact, instant, and sorcery spells your opponent's cast cost 1 more to cast, leaning in even heavier into that taxation on our opponents. Starts with 5 loyalty counters, -1 until your next turn, prevent all damage that would be dealt to and dealt by target permanent in opponent control. So just a nice little piece of protection on top of that taxation. For our enchantments, we have Luminarch Ascension. 2 mana at the beginning of each opponent's end step. If you didn't lose life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Luminarch Ascension. Pay 2. Put a 4/4 white angel creature token when flying onto the battlefield. Activate this ability only if it has 4 more quest counters on it. So again, this is another prime target for that proliferate. You can get one on there, and then each opponent's end step, cool. So that can trigger quite often, especially early game when you get it down, or you can just proliferate and then start pumping out those angels. Either way. 3 mana, Aura of Silence. Artifact and enchantment spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more to cast, and you can sacrifice it and destroy target artifact or enchantment. That's, again, a lot of great value because you're making your opponent's stuff even more expensive. If your opponents are running an artifact deck, they are cooked. Just with the amount of the Planeswalkers that we've covered already, your commander, that aura, their stuff's going to be costing 4, 5, 6 mana more just to lay anything. Last, for our enchantments, we have Inexorable Tide for 5 mana. It says whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. Holy bananas! That is absurd. That's crazy town with the amount of spells that we're going to be able to cast, because again, remember, all of our stuff is cheaper due to our commander. So we're playing a lot of those instants and sorceries. Like a good example, kind of going back a little bit to one of our Dream Fracture. 3 mana counter, target spells, controller draws a card, you draw a card. Cool. With our commander in play, that costs that 1 generic less. So now you're just paying the cost of counterspell, the OG counterspell, and you're also getting card draw on top of that. That's great. For our lands, we have mostly just basic lands. They're boring, nobody loves them, but they get the job done. We do have 3 non-basic lands. The first is Seagate, taps for blue, and then when it enters, you can have it tap for another color. Obviously, you're going to choose white. Celestial Colonnade, enters the battlefield taps for either white or blue, and you can pay 5 until end of turn. It becomes a 4/4 white-blue elemental creature with flying and vigilance. That's great. You can have an attacker. Because that's always the worst, right? When you get to that end game, you have 5,000 lands, you don't have anything to do with. Now you have an extra creature that you can attack with. And then last but not least, for our non-basic lands, we have Azorius Chancery, not Sanctuary, Chancery, which it's the bounced land that taps for 2. Finally, moving on, we have our creatures. First up, we have Ouija, the Exquisite Blade for 4 mana, 2 and Azorius. It's a 2/3, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life, you scry 2. Again, we have that one, the one Planeswalker in particular that loves when you scry cards. And whenever you cast your second spell each turn, exile up to 1 target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. We have quite a few creatures with great ETBs, so it's nice to be able to have that repeatable blank effect. The Council of 4, 5 mana for a 0/8. Whenever a player draws their second card each turn, whenever a player draws their second card during their turn, you draw a card, and whenever a player casts their second spell during their turn, you create a 2/2 white knight creature token. So this is giving you value on your turn, it's giving you value on your opponent's turn. You're getting quite a bit right there just for having a 0/8 on the battlefield. Tithe Taker, 2 mana. During your turn, spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast, and abilities your opponents cast or activate cost 1 more to activate unless they're a mana ability. And then it also has Afterlife, so when it dies, create a 1/1 white-black spirit creature token with flying. We don't really care about that much. This is just nice from the standpoint that, again, on top of the one that your commander is costing your opponents, if they try to interact, if they try to counterspell or do anything during your turn, it's costing them even more. So it's not ward necessarily, but ward adjacent. Reality Chip for 2 mana. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. That's nice, being able to see what's coming up. And as long as it's attached to a creature, you may play land and cast spells from the top of your library. So it's a 0/4 that you can reconfigure. Even just being able to see what's on top of your library is great, but being able to play stuff off the top of your library, it's adding to your hand. It's basically giving you 8 cards at a time to choose from. Madami, the Ageless. It is 6 mana for a flying 4/4, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, take an extra turn after this one. It can't attack during extra turns, but that is still insane to be able to get those extra turns to do the toxic things that we're trying to do. Celefi, Beloved of the Sea, 3 mana for a star 3, and its power is equal to your devotion to blue. We're running white-blue. We have a ton of other blue cards out here. It's going to be pretty easy to get a pretty high devotion right there. And creatures and enchantments you control have spells your opponents cast that target this permanent cost 1 more to cast. So again, now that is giving your stuff Ward 1 on top of your commander's ability. Spell-Tithe Enforcer, 5 mana in white for a 3/3. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, that player sacrifices a permanent unless he or she pays 1. If opponent has a token deck, they're probably just going to sacrifice it. They're not going to care as much. But if an opponent is not running a token deck, they're going to have to pay an additional 1 because they're not going to want to be sacrificing all their stuff every time they're trying to lay a spell. So again, more taxation on their stuff. Malevolent Hermit, 2 mana, 1 blue, sacrifice it, target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3, and then you can return it from your graveyard for its disturb cost. And it's a 2/2 flyer. It says non-creature spells you control can't be countered. That's great. And if it would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. But again, strong ability regardless of which side you have it out on. Lawin Cephalid Empress, 4 mana for a 2/3. When Lawwyn, the Cephalid Empress, comes into play, return all blue creatures your opponents control into their owner's hands. Your opponents can't play blue creature spells. That's disgusting. That is really disgusting. Depending on who you're playing against, depending on what your opponents are rocking, if they're in, well, first of all, if they're in mono blue, they're cooked. They're done for. They might as well just scoop and call it a day. But really, anything with blue in it, that is going to massively hamper what they're going to be able to do. I have a friend who runs a oh shoot, what's the commander? It's these twins that create a bunch of tokens, but it's in green blue. So you could lay that, bounce all the tokens, all their blue tokens anyway, and then prevent them from being able to do anything else. I cannot think of it. But I bet when that friend edits this video, they're going to drop it right here. They're going to put right here what their commander is. And maybe I'll review it one day. Mage of the Tabernacle, 4 mana for a 2/6, and it says all creatures have at the beginning of your upkeep sacrifice this creature unless you pay 1. To be fair, this does affect you. You are going to have to pay that 1 for your creatures. But again, since you're getting all of this free tax evasion, since all of your stuff is costing a lot less, you can pay the 1, keep the creatures you want to keep, and still have mana left over to be able to afford the things you want to do. Whereas your opponents are going to have to pay to keep all of their creatures. Again, a token deck, cooked, because they're not going to want to be constantly paying to keep all of those tokens around. They don't have the mana to, but they're not going to be able to do the things they want to do. Rug of Smothering. That just sounds terrifying. But for 3 mana for an artifact creature, it's a 1/3 of flying. Whenever a player casts a spell, they lose 1 life for each spell they've cast this turn. Boy, I sure hope you're not playing against somebody who's doing like a storm deck or something like that, because that's going to kill them real quick. Strict Proctor, 2 mana for a 1/3. It is a flyer, and it has whenever a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to trigger, counter that ability unless its controller pays 2. That's nice. There's not a lot of, I mean, there are some smothering type effects. Like what's the one? Torpor Orb, I believe. Again, editor guy, correct me right here if I'm wrong. If I'm not, cool. But I believe it's Torpor Orb or something like that, an artifact that stops activated abilities or triggered abilities with a thing entering the battlefield. But there's not a lot of creatures like that, so nice effect. Azor's Electors for 5 mana for a 3/5. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a filibuster counter on it, and if it has 5 or more filibuster counters on it, you win the game. Whenever a source deals damage to you, remove a filibuster counter from Azor's Electors. This right here, again, a great target for your proliferation. Get a counter on it, proliferate the heck out of that thing, win the game right there. I can't say this enough. I love alternate win cons. Anytime I can find a way to put one into a deck, I put one into the deck. That's where that comes in nice. Vryn, Wingmare for 3 mana. It is 2/1 with flying, and it says non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. So again, that is going to be affecting you as well too, but since your commander basically nullifies that, it's a wash for you, but that's now 2 for your opponents. Archon of Absolution, 4 mana for a 3/2 flyer and protection from white. Creatures can't attack you or planeswalkers you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures, which is basically just a Windborn Muse. I mean, same mana. It's a 2/3 for Windborn Muse, but it says creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature he or she controls that's attacking you. So, slightly different stats there, but same thing, taxing your opponents to even look at you. Thalia, Garden of Thraben, 2 mana for a 2/1. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Again, hopefully you're sensing a theme at this point. This is just taxation. until your opponents toss your tea or tell you you can't play this deck anymore. I've mostly just had the second one, not really the first one. Barl, Chief of Compliance, 2 mana for a 1/3. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Great value for what we're doing. Whenever you spell or ability you control counters a spell, we have a few counter spells in here. You may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Again, nice. Go through those cards. For 3 mana, Radane, God of the Worthy. It's a 2/3 with flying and vigilance. It says snowlands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. 99% confident your opponents are not going to be playing snowlands. I'm sure there's some people who do, and then great, ooh, wait, hey, more taxation. But it also says non-creature spells your opponents cast with converted mana cost 4 or greater, cost 2 more to cast. So then when your opponents are casting their big scary creatures, their creatures that are already costing an absurd amount, well now they're going to cost way more. With that in your commander and play 3 mana to play something that's already at least 4 mana, yikes, not a good time for them. Aven Mind Sensor, 3 mana for a 2/1 flying with flash, and it says if an opponent would search a library, that player searches the top 4 cards of their library instead. Imagine an opponent has a crack land like a Myriad Landscape where they're going to search for those 2 land cards. Well, now they can only search the top 4 cards, so if it doesn't have 2 of a kind, they're out of luck. Sun Titan for 6 mana for a 6/6 with vigilance. It says when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. We have quite a few of those. That's great value as the game goes on. Angelic Arbiter for 7 mana for an angel, a 5/6 angel with flying. It says each opponent who casts a spell this turn can't attack with creatures, and each opponent who attack with creatures this turn can't cast spells. So that is going to severely limit your opponents in what they can do. They're going to have to either choose to help themselves build their board state or to attack you, but not doing both at the same time. Then we have Unsettled Mariner. It is for Azorius, white-blue. It's a 2/2. It's a changeling. And whenever you or a permanent you control becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell unless or ability unless its controller pays 1. So again, basically just ward 1 for all of your creatures, or, well, just permanents in general. So that's kind of nice. And last but not least, our final creature, our final card of the deck, we have, again, another one of the most toxic cards in Magic. We have Elesh Norn, Grand Cenobite for 7 mana. It's a 4/7 with vigilance. It says other creatures you control get +2/+2, and creatures your opponents control get -2/-2. This is kind of like the white version of Mahat's Feathers Knight, which is another deck that I have built on the channel, and you should definitely go ahead and check out. This is up there with Grand Arbiter, where, again, on its own, it is incredibly toxic. It's incredibly painful to play against. I have had it in this deck for quite a while, and again, our lovely editor who puts these videos together, I just want you to know, if you ever upset me enough, I will build a deck around this card. And you thought Maha was bad? Just wait until you see Elesh Norn. Or threats aside. Let's not make threats. Please, you wonderful viewers, let us know in the comments below. Do you want to see me build an Elesh Norn deck and punish my friends with it? I'm a man of the people. I'll do what the people say. You know, so if this is something you want, it'll happen. If not, hey, it'll just stay in this deck. So that right there is the deck build for, again, Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. This boy, not super duper fun to play against, but if you want to build this deck, I have the entire deck list down in the description below. Make sure you check it out. And if you want to see more deck builds like this, more toxic decks, more deck challenges, things like that, make sure you subscribe, ring the bell notification. Every Friday we have a brand new deck build coming out for you. And that being said, that's the end of the video. So make sure you like this video, and we are going to have another video on screen here, another great deck build that I think you're going to like. That being said, I love y'all. I'll see you next time.